I want to talk for a moment about hearing the hard thing. And it's going to be story time in this episode of King's Code Radio. But we're talking about hearing the hard thing. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that and how you can hear the hard thing and move forward in life on this road of becoming a king under the King of Kings. Stay tuned.
You're listening to King's Code Radio, where we are a movement of men rising up as kings unto the King of Kings, and producing massive results in every area of life. Here is your host, Paul Cooley.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of King's Code Radio. I want to talk about something that's been on my mind for a little while now, and that is hearing the hard thing. When it comes to hearing the hard thing, I'm not talking about somebody having something to tell you. I'm talking about hearing the hard thing that God is trying to tell you. See, I think we like to say, yes, we're believers, we're Christians, and so forth, but it is a whole other thing to learn how God speaks to you. And if you're of the camp that God doesn't speak today only through the actual Bible, you're missing out, because God is alive and active today. And yes, He's not going to say things that's contrary and it contradicts the Word. Man, you got the Holy Spirit. Like, why would you not want to hear God speak specifically about a current situation that you're dealing with in your life? Now, taking it a step further of learning how God speaks to you is one thing, but then getting to the place and point where you are able and willing to hear the hard thing, that's another topic. And that's what I want to talk about today, is being able to hear the hard thing and being willing to hear the hard thing. It's going to be story time in a moment, and I'm going to give you a real life example. But I think about a Bible character. I'm sure it was difficult for Abraham and Sarah to hear that they were going to have a baby. Sarah's womb was closed up. They're old. That'd be a hard thing to hear. God, is that really God, or is that the enemy messing with me? Is that my flesh? I'm thinking it probably was hard to hear, hey, you know what? Noah, you need to build an ark. And to be able to not only hear the hard thing, but hear the details and specifics of what was needed to build the ark. And then to continue to operate in faith and obedience to actually build the thing as people are mocking you. Being able to hear the hard thing. And there's been guys that I have been coaching inside of our King's Code coaching and inside of our King's Armory coaching program, where they're in the midst of crisis. And in the midst of crisis, you are desperately wanting to hear what God has to say to you and get a battle strategy from Him. And in doing so, there's been, our goal obviously is always, especially when it's a crisis in marriage, our goal is reconciliation. But there are those times where reconciliation is not going to happen. And this is where it comes down to hearing the hard thing. There's been countless guys that I have walked through where we have asked the Lord, am I released from this marriage? Is the marriage over? Are you going to restore this thing, or is it over? And this is a very difficult place to be, because now we're getting to beliefs. There's been a number of conversations, even in the recent weeks and months, where I've had multiple guys on this topic of reconciliation versus divorce. And I've had to ask them, are you willing to hear the hard thing? And see, when we have a belief that divorce is evil, bad, God hates it, and so forth, and that is a whole other topic for another podcast. When you're of that belief system that divorce is not an option, it's bad, it's wrong, it's all that. And I dealt with that when my wife left, almost 6 years ago. Divorce was not an option. It was not even an option. Despite everything that took place, it still wasn't an option. But as I'm discussing with these guys, are you willing to hear the hard thing? Has it ever entered your mind that God could actually say you are released and this marriage is over? And actually allowing you and telling you divorce is the direction. Even hearing that right now, that might rub you the wrong way. But are you willing to hear the hard thing, or are you so tied up into your own beliefs and opinions that we don't even hear God about His opinion? That's the real point and gist of this whole thing. Now I want to tell you a little story. Give you a little preface first here. There's a friend and mentor of mine that I've known since I was about 19. And this lady was one of two people at that time where I went, I didn't even know you could have a relationship with God like this. And so I've learned a ton from her. Now, this is a story going back probably 30 plus years ago for her. Now, she had two kids, So it is story time. And so with this particular woman, again, talking about hearing the hard thing, at this point in time, 30 plus years ago, she had a daughter and son. And at the time, I think they were probably, and I'm guessing here, 6 and 8. It may have been younger, maybe older, but roughly around that time. And she took them to a lake to have a little barbecue. The husband was not there. And so the kids are playing in the shallow end of this lake. Now, the lake did go deep, but the kids are playing the shallow end, right? And they weren't necessarily together, though. They're kind of different spots, and she's watching as a good parent would. And she takes her eyes off of them for a split second to look down to continue setting up the picnic area here. And she looks back, and all of a sudden the kids are gone. Like they were there, and now they're not. And this was not a neglect situation. I mean, literally, look back, they're gone. And in this moment, now this is where panic and every other form of emotion and thought would come in. And some parents may freeze. Other parents may say, okay, I gotta get both of them now. Which one do I pick first? They're not together. They're separate. Distances are different. All of this stuff. And this is that moment of time where you've got to be able to hear the hard thing. In that moment of panic, of both of her kids suddenly not being there anymore, and they are underwater, she hears the Lord say, "You get her, and I'll get him. You get your daughter, I'm going to get your son." Now, being able to hear the hard thing, let alone being in that place where you are going to hear the Lord in a panic situation, this is a crisis taking place, and there is no time to waste. She was able and willing to hear the hard thing. Now, she heard a hard thing. You get her, I'll get him. This is where now hearing the hard thing and moving forward in faith and obedience and actually doing the thing. She dove in where she saw the daughter. Think about the act of obedience and faith this is. I've heard God tell me the hard thing. He's saying, you get her, but you trust me with him. That's a hard thing. So she dives in, scrambling to find the daughter, finds the daughter, gets her back on the shore. Now this is where she's heard the hard thing. She's operated in faith and obedience up until this point. But now, how tempting would it be to say, I got her, she's safe, let me jump back in the water to go get the boy. This would be a natural tendency for any normal parent. And it was for her as well. She's like, I'm standing on the shore. I could dive back in to get my boy. But she knew that she had heard the Lord say, no, I'm going to get him. Seconds, which probably felt like hours, were going by. A minute had gone by. And as she's comforting the daughter, going, God, you said you were going to get him. You said you were going to get him. And after a minute or two, and then maybe it was longer, maybe it was shorter, but I'm just going to say a minute or two, although I think she may have said it was longer than a minute or two. She finally sees her boy's hand pop up out of the water on the other side of the lake onto this rock. Boom, there he is. God was faithful. And then the boy, on the way home, was all about telling the story about how underwater he saw Jesus riding a horse, commanding the different things in the water, the fish in the water, to go this way, go that way. And he looked down and smiled at the boy, and they had a conversation. And he's like, all right, I'm going to take you back up now. Whole conversation, whole thing happened for this boy. All because she was willing to hear the hard thing. And then by faith and extreme obedience, stay on that shore and not go after the boy, as tempting as that may be. And God was faithful. I believe if she had jumped in, that would have been an act of disobedience, and her boy could have drowned. But because she had heard the hard thing, which is key number one, I'm willing to hear the hard thing, and I'm able to hear the hard thing. And now, by faith, I am willing to stand in a radical obedience that will kill all compromise, and stand on that shore and wait for God to do the thing that he said he was going to do. some of you listening to this is going to think that's absolutely nuts and crazy. But this is actually what walking by faith looks like. And I think there's levels of this faith. And so no matter what crisis you may be facing right now, the main question right now is, are you able to hear the hard thing? Are you willing to hear the hard thing? Or are you too busy saying, oh no, that's the devil messing with me, or that's my flesh? God would never tell me this thing. Now, I personally have experienced this more than once in my life, and I've even recently experienced this, about hearing the hard thing and going, oh, that was the Lord. That was the Lord. So I say all of this and keep this short. Are you willing to hear the hard thing? And then are you willing to operate in faith, in extreme obedience, and say, I know I've heard God. I know that I know that I know I've heard God. Now, I'm not going to claim this is all just a piece of cake, because obviously it's not. There is a maturing and a walk that has to take place. And this is why, guys, inside of our coaching program, we do one-on-ones, and I will walk them through this process, because sometimes it's hard to hear on your own. But regardless of where you find yourself today, regardless of what you're facing today, I want to stress the point. There is hope. God is faithful, and God's got a plan. And you are going to make it out the other side okay. But in this process of walking through life, walking through a crisis, ask yourself this question: am I willing to hear the hard thing? And if I've heard the hard thing, am I willing now to operate in faith and obedience? Ask yourself these questions today, because I'll tell you, these are life-altering changes that will take place when you choose to hear the hard thing, stand in faith, and move in obedience. So guys, until next time, God bless. If you like this, make sure you like, subscribe to this podcast. This is all a part of the journey of rising up into a king unto the King of Kings. And if you'd like more information about what we do, visit us at thekingscode.com. God bless, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.